Hello, and welcome to the stream. Tonight I'm going to be reading a really old book. I'm not a professional reader by any means, but my goal is to just sort of try something and see how it works. So tonight I'm going to be reading this really old book called The Greene Murder Case. It came out in 1928, and it was written by an author known as S.S. Van Dine, um, also known as I think like William Huntington Wright. And maybe it was Willard Hunter Wright, Huntington Wright, whatever. Anyway, so I thought I'd read this book, and yeah, so that's what I'm doing. All right, let's get into it. So here you can see this is the floor plan of the second floor, and this is the Greene mansion here. See, it's surrounded by trees. It's winter, I guess. There's snow on the ground, and it appears to be right next to, I don't know, like a lake or a river. Maybe it's frozen. I don't know. Anyway, it's bitter, and it's about a murder, maybe more than one. So we'll see. Anyway, so here we go. Chapter 1. Chapter 1. A Double Tragedy. Tuesday, November 9 at 10 a.m. It has long been a source of wonder to me why the leading starting off strong here. It has long been a source of wonder to me why the leading criminological writers, men like Edmund Lester Pearson, H.B. Irving, Philson Young, Cannon Brooks, William Bothliot, and Harold Eaton, have not devoted more space to the Greene tragedy. For here surely is one of the outstanding murder mysteries of modern times. A case practically unique in the annals of latter-day crime. And yet I realize, as I read over my own voluminous notes on the case and inspect the various documents relating to it, how little of its inner history ever came to light, and how impossible it would be for even the most imaginative chronicler to fill in the hiatuses. The world, of course, knows the external facts. For over a month, the press of 2 continents was filled with accounts of this appalling tragedy, and even the bare outline was sufficient to gratify the public's craving for the abnormal and the spectacular. But the inside story of the catastrophe surpassed even the wildest flights of public fancy, and as I now sit down to divulge these facts for the first time, I am oppressed with a feeling akin to unreality. Although I was a witness to most of them, and hold in my possession the incontestable records of their actuality. Of the fiendish ingenuity which lay behind its terrible crime, of the warped psychological motives that had inspired it, and of the strange hidden sources to its technique, the world is completely ignorant. Moreover, no explanation has ever been given to the analytic steps that led to its solution, nor have the events attending the mechanism of that solution, events in themselves highly dramatic and unusual, ever been recounted. The public believes that the termination of the case was a result of the usual police methods of investigation, but this is because the public is unaware of many of the vital factors of the crime itself, because both the police department and the district attorney's office have, as if by tacit agreement, refused to make known the entire truth, whether for fear of being disbelieved or merely because there are certain things so terrible that no man wishes to talk of them. I do not know. The record, therefore, which I am about to set down, is the most complete and unedited history of the Greene Holocaust. I feel that now the truth should be known, for its history, and one should not shrink from historical facts. Also, I believe the credit for the solution of this case should go where it belongs. The man who elucidated the mystery and brought it to a close, that palimpsest of horror, was curiously enough in no way officially connected with the police, and in all the published accounts of the murder his name was not once mentioned. And yet had it not been for him and his novel methods of criminal deduction, the heinous plot against the Greene family would have been conclusively successful. The police in their researches were not dealing dogmatically with the evidential appearances of the crime, whereas the operations of the criminal were being conducted on a plane quite beyond the comprehension of the ordinary investigator. The man who, after weeks of sedulous and disheartening analysis, eventually ferreted out the source of horror, was a young social aristocrat and intimate friend of John F. X. Markham, the district attorney. His name I am not at liberty to divulge, but for the purposes of these chronicles, I have chosen to call him Philo Vance. He is no longer in the country, having transferred his residence several years ago to the villa outside of Florence, and since he has no intention of returning to America, he has acceded to my request to publish the history of the criminal cases in which he participated as a sort of amicus curiae. Markham also had retired to private life, and Sergeant Ernest Heath, that doughty and honest officer of the Homicide Bureau, who officially handled the Greene case for the police department, has, though an unexpected legacy, been able to gratify his life's ambition to breed fancy Wyandottes on a model farm in the Mohawk Valley. The circumstances have made it possible for me to publish my intimate record of the Greene tragedy. A few words are necessary to explain my own participation in the case. I say participation, though in reality my role was that of the passive spectator. For years, I had been Vance's personal attorney. I had resigned from my father's law firm, Van Dine, Davis, and Van Dine, in order to devote myself exclusively to Vance's legal and financial needs, which, by the way, were not many. Vance and I had been friends from our undergraduate days at Harvard. I found in my new duties as his legal agent and monetary steward a sinecure combined with many social and cultural compensations. Vance at the time was 34 years old. He was just under 6 feet, slender, sinewy, and graceful. His chiseled, regular features gave his face the attraction of strength and uniform modeling, but a sardonic coldness of expression precluded by the designation of handsome. He had aloof gray eyes, a straight, slender nose, and a mouth suggesting both cruelty and asceticism. But despite the severity of his lineaments, which acted like an impenetrable glass wall between him and his fellows, he was highly sensitive and mobile. And although his manner was somewhat detached from... He was highly sensitive and mobile. And though his manner was somewhat detached and supercilious, he exerted an undeniable fascination over those who knew him at all well. Much of his education had been acquired in Europe, and he still retained a slight Oxonian accent and intonation, though I happened to be aware that this was of no affection. He cared too little for the opinions of others to trouble about maintaining any pose. He was an infatigable student. His mind was ever eager for knowledge, and he devoted much of his time to the study of ethnology and psychology. His greatest intellectual enthusiasm was art, and he fortunately had an income sufficient to indulge his passion for collecting. It was, however, his interest in psychology and his application to the individual behaviorism that first turned his attention to the criminal problems which came under Markham's jurisdiction. The first case which he participated was, as I have recorded elsewhere, the murder of Alvin Benson. The second was the seemingly insoluble strangling of the famous Broadway beauty Margaret Odell. And in the late fall of the same year came the Greene tragedy. As in the two former cases, I kept a complete record of this new investigation. I possessed myself of every available document, making verbatim copies of those claimed for the police archives, and even jotted down the numerous conversations that took place in and out of conference between Vance and the official investigators. And, in addition, I kept a diary which, for elaborateness and completeness, would have been the despair of Samuel Samuel Pepys. The Greene murder case occurred towards the end of Markham's first year in office. As you may remember, the winter came very early that season. There were 2 severe blizzards in November, and the amount of snowfall for that month broke all local records for 18 years. I mention this fact of early snows because it played a sinister part in the Greene affair. It was, indeed, one of the vital factors of the murderer's scheme. No one has yet understood or even sensed the connection between the unseasonable weather of the late fall and the fatal tragedy that fell upon the Greene household. But that is because all of the dark secrets of the case were not made known. Vance was projected into the Benson murder as a result of a direct challenge from Markham, and his activities in the Canary case were due to his own expressed desire to lend a hand. But pure coincidence was responsible for his participation in the Greene investigation. During the 2 months that had elapsed since his solution of the Canary death, Markham had called upon several times regarding moot points of criminal detection in connection with the routine work of the district attorney's office. And it was during an informal discussion of one of these problems that the Greene case was first mentioned. Markham and Vance had long been friends, though to similar tastes in ethical outlook, they nevertheless respected each other profoundly. I have often marveled in the friendship of these 2 antipodal men, but as the years went on by, I became more and more to understand it. It was as if they were drawn together by those very qualities which each realized, perhaps with a certain repressed regrets, were lacking in his own nature. Markham was forthright, brusque, and on occasion domineering, taking life with grim and serious concern, and following the dictates of his legal conscience in the very face of every obstacle, honest, incorruptible, and untiring. Vance, on the other hand, was volatile, debonair, and possesses perpetual juvenilian cynicism, smiling ironically at the smiling ironically at the bitterest realities, and consistently fulfilling the role of a whimsically disinterested spectator of life. But withal, he understood people as profoundly as he understood art, and his dissection of motives and his shrewd readings of character were, as I had on many occasions to witness, uncannily accurate. Markham apprehended these qualities in Vance and sensed their true value. It was not yet 10 o'clock in the morning of November the 9th when Vance and I, after motoring to the old criminal courts building on the corner of Franklin and Center Streets, went directly to the district attorney's office on the 4th floor. On that momentous forenoon of 2 gangsters, each accusing each other of firing the fatal shot in a recent payroll holdup, were to be cross-examined by Markham, and this interview was to decide the question as to which of the men could be charged with the murder and which held as a state's witness. Markham and Vance had discussed the situation that night before in the lounge room of the Stuyvesant Club, and Vance had expressed a desire to be present at the examination. Markham had readily assented, and so we had risen early and driven downtown. The interview with 2 men lasted for an hour, and Vance's disconcerting opinion was that neither was guilty of the actual shooting. "You know, Markham," he drawled, when the sheriff had returned the prisoners to the Tombs, "those 2 Jack Sheppards are quite sincere. Each one thinks he is telling the truth. Ergo, neither of them fired the shot. A distressing predicament. They're obvious gallows birds torn from the gibbet, and it's a beastly shame not to be able to round out their destines in proper fashion. I say, weren't there Wasn't there another participant in the holdup? Markham nodded. Third got away, according to these two. It was a well-known gamester named Eddie Melippo. Then Eduardo was your man. Markham did not reply. And Vance rose lazily and reached for his ulster. By the by, he said, slipping into his coat, I note that our uplifting press beckoned its front pages this morning with headlines about a pogrom at the old Greene mansion last night. Wherefore? Markham glanced quickly at the clock on the wall and frowned. That reminds me, Chester Greene called up the first thing this morning and insisted on seeing me. I told him it was 11 o'clock. Where do you fit in? Vance had taken his hand from the doorknob and drew out his cigarette case. I don't, snapped Markham. But people think the district attorney's office is a kind of clearinghouse for all their troubles. It happens, however, that I have known Chester Greene a long time, and we're both members of the Marleybone Golf Club. And so I must listen to this plaint about what is obviously an attempt to annex the famous Greene plate. Burglary? What? Vance shot off a few puffs of his cigarette. With 2 women shot? Oh, it was a miserable business. An amateur, no doubt. Got in a panic, shot up the place, and bolted. Seems a dashed curious proceeding. Vance abstractedly reseated himself in a large armchair near the door. Did the antique cutlery actually disappear? Nothing was taken. The thief was evidently frightened off before he made his haul. Sounds a bit thick, don't you know? An amateur thief breaks into a prominent home, casts a predatory eye on the dining room silver, takes alarm, goes up the stairs, shoots 2 women in their respective boudoirs, then flees. Very touching, and all that, but unconvincing. Whence came the caressing theory? Markham was glowering, but when he spoke, it was with an effort at restraint. Fethergill was on duty last night when the call was relayed that from headquarters, and accompanied the police to the house. He agrees with their conclusions. Nevertheless, I could bear to know why Chester Greene is desirous of having polite converse with you. Markham compressed his lips. It was not in cordial mood that morning, and Vance's flippant curiosity irked him. After a moment, however, he said grudgingly, Since the attempted robbery interests you so keenly, you may, if you insist, wait and hear what Greene has to say. I'll stay, smiled Vance, removing his coat. I'm weak. Just can't resist a passionate entreaty. Which one of the Greenes is Chester? And how is he related to the 2 deceased? There was only one murder, Markham corrected him in a tone of forbearance. The oldest daughter, an unmarried woman in her early 40s, was killed instantly. The younger daughter, who was shot, as I believe, a chance recovery. And Chester? Chester's the older one, a man of 40, or thereabouts. He was the first person on the scene after the shots had been fired. What other members of the family are there? I know old Tobias Greene has gone to his maker. Yes, Tobias died a long time. Yes, Tobias died about 12 years ago, but his wife is still living, though she's a helpless paralytic. There were 5 children. The oldest, Julia, next Chester, and then an older daughter, Sabella. A few years under 30, I should say. Rex, a sickly, bookish boy, a year or so younger than Sabella, and Ada, the youngest, an adopted daughter of 22 or 3 perhaps. And it was Julia who was killed, eh? Which one of the other 2 girls was shot? The younger, Ada, her room, it seems, across the hall from Julia's, and the thief appears to have got it by mistake while making his escape. As I understand it, he entered Ada's room immediately after firing on Julia, saw his error, fired again, then fled, eventually going down the stairs out the main entrance. Vance smoked a while in silence. Your hypothetical intruder must have been induced from the confusion, and have mistaken Ada's bedroom for the staircase. What? And then there's the query. What is the anonymous gentleman who called to protect the plate, doing above stairs? Probably looking at jewelry. Probably looking for jewelry. Markham was rapidly losing patience. I am not omniscient. There was irony in his inflection. Now, Markham, pleaded Vance cajolingly. Don't be vindictive. Your Greene burglary promises several nice points in academic speculation. Permit me to indulge my idle whims. At that moment, Swackler, Markham's youthful and alert secretary, appeared at the swinging door which communicated a narrow chamber between the main waiting room and the district attorney's private office. Mr. Chester Greene is here, he announced. Chapter 2. The Investigation Opens. Tuesday, November 9th, 11 a.m. When Chester Greene entered, it was obvious he was under a nervous strain. But his nervousness evoked no sympathy in me. From the very first, I disliked the man. He was of medium height and was bordering on corpulence. There was something soft and flabby in his contours, and, though he was dressed with studied care, there were certain signs of overemphasis about his clothes. His cuffs were too tight, his collar was too snug, and the colored silk handkerchief hung too far out of his breast pockets. He was slightly bald, and the lids of his closed-set eyes projected like those of a man with Bright's disease. His mouth, surmounted by a close-cropped blonde mustache, was loose, and his chin receded slightly and was deeply creased below the under lip. He typified the pampered idler. When he had shaken hands with Markham and Vance, I had been introduced. He seated himself and meticulously inserted a brown Russian cigarette in a long amber and gold container. I'd be tremendously obliged, Markham, he said, lighting the cigarette from an ivory pocket lighter, if you'd make a personal investigation of the row that occurred at our diggings last night. The police will never get anywhere the way they're going about it. Good fellows, you understand the police. But, well, there's something about this affair. I don't know how to put it. Anyway, I don't like it. Markham studied him closely for several moments. Just what's on your mind, Greene? The other crushed out his cigarette, though he had taken more than half a dozen puffs and drummed indecisively on the arm of his chair. Wish I knew. The rum's affair. Damned rum. It's a rum affair. Damned rum. There's something in the back of it, too. Something that's going to raise the very devil if we don't stop it. Can't explain it. It's a feeling I've got. Perhaps Mr. Greene is a psychic, commented Vance, with a look of bland innocence. The man swung about and scrutinized Vance with aggressive condescension. Tush! He brought out another Russian cigarette and turned again to Markham. I do wish you'd take a peep at the situation. Markham hesitated. Surely you've some reason for disagreeing with the police and appealing to me. Funny thing, but I haven't. It seems to me Greene's hand shook slightly as he lit his second cigarette. I simply know that my mind rejects a burglar story automatically. It was difficult to tell if he was being frank or deliberately hiding something. I did feel, however, that some sort of fear lurked beneath his uneasiness. I also got the impression that he was far from being heartbroken over the tragedy. It seems to me, declared Markham, that the theory of the burglary is entirely consistent with the facts. There may have been many other cases of housebreaker suddenly taking alarm, losing his head, and needlessly shooting people. Greene rose abruptly and began pacing up and down. I can't argue the case, he muttered. It's beyond that. You understand me. He looked at Greene, the district attorney, with staring eyes. Gad, it's got me in a cold sweat. All too vague and untangible, Markham obviously observed kindly. I'm inclined to think the tragedy has upset you. Perhaps after a day or two? Greene lifted his protesting hand. It's no go. I'm telling you, Markham, the police will never find their burglar. I feel it. Here. He mincingly laid a manicured hand on his breast. Vance had been watching him with a faint suggestion of amusement. Now he stretched his legs before him and gazed up at the ceiling. I say, Mr. Greene, pardon the intrusion on your esoteric gropings, but do you know Of anyone with a reason for wanting your two sisters out of the way? The man looked very blank for a moment. No, he answered finally. I can't say that I do. Who in heaven's name would want who in heaven's name would want to kill two harmless women? I haven't the groggiest notion. But since you repudiate the burglar theory, and since the two ladies were undoubtedly shot, it's inferable that one sought their demise, and it occurred to me that you, being the brother and domiciled en famille, might know some of them who harbored homicidal sentiments towards them. Greene bristled and thrust his head forward. I know of no one, he blurted. Then turning to Markham, he continued wheedlingly, if I had the slightest suspicion, don't you think I would come out with it? The thing has got to be on my nerves. I've been mulling over it all night, and it's bothersome, frightfully bothersome. Markham nodded noncommittally, and rising, walked over to the window where he stood, his hands behind him, gazing down on the gray stone masonry of the tombs. Vance, despite his apparent apathy, had been studying Greene closely, and as Markham turned to the window, he straightened up slightly in his chair. Tell me, he began, interrogating in his Tell me, he began in an ingratiating note in his voice, just what happened last night. I understand you were the first to reach the prostrate women. I was the first to reach my sister Julia, retorted Greene with a hint of resentment. It was Sprout, the butler, who found Ada unconscious, bleeding from a nasty wound in her back. Her back, eh? Vance leaned forward and lifted his eyebrows. She was shot from behind, then? Yes, Greene frowned and inspected his fingernails, as if he too sensed something disturbing in the fact. And Miss Julia Greene, she too shot from behind? No, from the front. Extraordinary. Vance blew a ring of smoke towards the dusty chandelier. And had both women retired for the night? An hour before. But what has that got to do with it? No one ever knows, does they? Do they? No, one never knows, does one? However, it's always well to be in possession of these little details when trying to run down the elusive source of psychic nature. Psychic seizure be damned, growled Greene, truculently. Can't a man have a feeling about something without quite? But you've asked for the district attorney's assistance, and I'm sure he would like a few data before making a decision. Markham came forward and sat down on the edge of the table. His curiosity had been aroused, and he indicated to Greene that his sympathy with Vance's interrogation. Greene pursed his lips and returned the cigarette lighter to his cigarette holder to his pocket. Oh, very well. What else do you want to know? You might relate for us. Dulcetly, he resumed Vance. The exact order of events that you heard the first shot. I presume you did hear for the first shot. Certainly I heard it. I couldn't have helped hearing it. Julia's room is right next to mine, and I was still awake. I jumped into my slippers and pulled on my dressing gown. Then I went out to the hall. It was dark, and I felt my way along the hall until I reached Julia's door. I opened it and looked in. I didn't know who might be there waiting it for me to pop. I opened it and looked in. I didn't know who might be there waiting to pop me, and I saw her lying in bed, the front of her nightgown covered in blood. There was no one else in the room, and I went to her immediately. Just then I heard another shot, which sounded as if it came from Ada's room. It was a bit muzzy by this time, and I didn't know what better to do. As I stood by Julia's bed in something of a funk, oh, I was in a funk, all right. Can't say I blame you, Vance encouraged him. Greene nodded. A damn ticklish position to be in. Well, anyway, as I stood there, I heard someone coming down the stairs from the servants' quarters on the 3rd floor, and recognized old Sprout's tread. He fumbled along in the dark, and I heard him enter Ada's door. Then he called to me, and I hurried over. Ada was lying in the front dressing table, and Sprout and I lifted her on the bed. I'd gone a bit weak in the knees and was expecting any minute to hear another shot. I didn't know why. Anyway, it didn't come, and I heard Sprout's voice in the hall telephone calling up Dr. Von Blon. I see nothing in your account, Greene, inconsistent with the theory of the burglar, observed Markham. And furthermore, Fethergill, my assistant, says there were 2 sets of confused footprints in the snow outside the front door. Greene shrugged his shoulders, but did not answer. By the way, Mr. Greene, Vance slipped down in his chair and was staring into space. You said that when you looked into Miss Julia's room, you saw her in bed. How was that? Did you turn on the light? Why, no, the man appeared puzzled by the question. The light was on. There was a flutter of interest in Vance's eyes. And how about Miss Ada's room? Was the light on there also? Yes. Vance reached into his pocket and drawing out his cigarette case, carefully and deliberately selected a cigarette. I recognized in the action and evidence of repressed inner excitement. So the lights were on in both rooms. Most interesting. Markham, too, recognized the eagerness beneath his apparent indifference, and regarded him expectantly. And, pursed Vance, after lighting his cigarette leisurely, how long a time before you say elapsed between the 2 shots? Greene was obviously annoyed by this cross-examination, but he answered readily. 2 or 3 minutes, certainly no longer. Still, ruminated Vance, after you heard the first shot, you rose from your bed, donned the slippers and robe, and went out in the hall, felt along the wall to the next room, opened the door cautiously, peered inside, and then crossed the room to the bed. All this, I gather, before the second shot was fired? Is that correct? Certainly, it's correct. Well, well, as you say, 2 or 3 minutes. Yes, at least that. Astonishing! Vance turned to Markham. Really, old man, I don't wish to influence your judgment, but I rather think you ought to accede to Mr. Greene's request to take a hand in our investigation. I, too, have a psychic feeling about this case. Something tells me that your eccentric burglar will prove as an ignis fatuus. Markham eyed him with meditative curiosity. Not only had Vance's questioning of Greene interested him keenly, but he knew, as a result of long experience, that Vance would not have made the suggestion that he had not a good reason for doing so. I was in no wise surprised, therefore, when he turned to his restive visitor and said, Very well, Greene. I'll see what I can do in the matter. I'll probably be at your house early in the afternoon. Please see that everyone is present, as I want to question them. Greene held out a trembling hand. The domestic roster, family, and servants will be complete when you arrive. He strode pompously from the room. Vance sighed. Not a nice creature, Markham. Not a nice creature. I shall never be a politician if it involves an acquaintance with such a gentleman. Markham seated himself in the desk with a disgruntled air. Greene is highly regarded as a social, not a political decoration, he said maliciously. He belongs to your totem, not mine. Fancy that, Vance stretched himself luxuriously. Still, it's you who fascinate him. Intuition tells me he is not over-fond of me. You did treat him a bit cavalierly. Sarcasm is not exactly a means of endearment. But Markham, old thing, I wasn't pining for Chester's affection. You think he knows, or suspects something? Vance gazed through the long window into the bleak sky beyond. I wonder, he murmured. Then, is Chester by any chance a typical representation of the Greene family? Of recent years I've done so little mingling with the elite that I'm woefully ignorant of the East Side nabobs. Nabobs? Markham nodded reflectively. I'm afraid he is. The original Greene stock was sturdy, but the present generation seems to have gone somewhat to pot. Old Tobias III, Chester's father, was rugged and in many ways an admirable character. He appears, however, to have been the last heir of the ancient Greene qualities. What's left of the family has suffered some sort of disintegration. They're not exactly soft, but tainted with patches of insipid decay, like fruit that's lain on the ground too long. But much money and leisure, I imagine, and too little restraint. On the other hand, there's a certain intellectuality lurking in the new Greenes. They all seem to have good minds, even the futile and misdirected. In fact, I think you underestimate Chester. For all his banalities and effeminate mannerisms, he's far from being as stupid as you regard him. I regard Chester as stupid? My dear Markham, you will wrong me abominably. No, there is nothing of the anointed ass about our Chester. He's shrewder than you think him. Those odemonous eyelids veil a pair of particularly crafty eyes. Indeed, it was largely his studied pose of fatuousness that led me to suggest that you aid and abet in the investigation. Markham leaned back and narrowed his eyes. What's in your mind, Vance? I told you, a psychic seizure. Same like Chester's subliminal visitation. Markham knew, by this elusive answer, that the moment Vance had no intention of being more definite, and after a moment of scowling silence, he turned to the telephone. If I am to take on this case, I'd better find out who has charge of it, and get preliminary information I can. He called up Inspector Moran, the commanding officer of the Detective Bureau. After a brief conversation, he turned to Vance with a smile. Your friend, Sergeant Heath, has the case in hand. He happened to be in the office just now, and is coming here immediately. In less than 15 minutes, Heath arrived. Despite the fact that he had been up most of the nights, he appeared unusually alert and energetic. His broad, pugnacious features were as His broad, pugnacious features were as imperturbable as ever, and his pale blue eyes held their habitual penetrating intentiveness. He greeted Markham with an elaborate, though perfunctory handshake, and then, seeing Vance, relaxed his features into a good-natured smile. Well, if it isn't Vance. What have you been up to, sir? Vance rose and shook hands with him. Alas, Sergeant, I've been immersed in the terracotta ornamentation of Renaissance facades and other such trivialities since I saw you last. But I'm happy to denote that crime is picking up again. It's now a deuced drab world without a nice murky murder now and then, don't you know? Heath cocked an eye and turned inquiringly to the district attorney. He had long since learned how to read between the lines of Vance's badinage. It's this Greene case, Sergeant, said Markham. I thought so, Heath sat down heavily. He inserted a black cigar between his lips, but nothing's broken yet. But nothing's broken yet. We're rounding up all the regulars and looking into their alibis for last night. But it'll take several days before the check's up on the complete. Checkup's complete. It'll be several days before the checkup's complete. If the bird who did the job hadn't got scarred before he grabbed the swag, it might have been. We might be able to trace him through the pawn shops and fences. But something rattled him, or he wouldn't have shut up the works the way he did. And that's what makes me think he may be a new one at the racket. If he is, it'll make our job harder. He held a match in his cupped hands to his cigar. He puffed furiously. What did you want to know about the prowl, sir? Markham hesitated. The sergeant's matter-of-fact assumption that a common burglar was the culprit disconcerted him. Chester Greene was here. He explained presently, and it seems convinced that the shooting was not the work of a thief. He asked me a special favor to look into the matter. Heath gave a derisive grunt. Who but a burglar in a panic would shoot down 2 women? Quite so, Sergeant. It was Vance who answered. Still, the lights were turned on in both rooms, though the woman had gone to bed an hour before. There was an interval of several minutes before the 2 shots. I know all that, Heath spoke impatiently. But if an amateur did the job, we can't tell exactly what did happen upstairs there last night when a bird loses his head. Ah, but there's the rub. When a thief loses his head, do you see, he is apt to go from room to room, turning the lights on, even assuming he knows where and how to turn them on. And he certainly isn't going to dally around for several minutes in a black hall before such fantastic operations, especially after he has shot someone and alarmed the house. What? It doesn't look like panic to me. It looks strangely like design. Moreover, why should this precious amateur of yours be cavorting about this boudoirs upstairs when the loot was in the dining room below? We'll learn about that when we've got our man, countered Heath doggedly. The point is, Sergeant, to put in Markham, I've given Mr. Greene my promise to look into the matter, and I wanted to get what details I could from you. You understand, of course, he nodded mollifyingly, that that I shall not interfere with your activities in any way. Whatever the outcome of the case, your department will receive entire credit. Oh, that's all right, sir. Experience has taught Heath that he has nothing to fear in the way of losing kudos when working with Markham. But I don't think, in spite of Mr. Vance's ideas, that you'll find much in the Greene case to warrant attention. Perhaps not, Markham admitted. However, I've committed myself, and I think I'll run out of this afternoon and look over the situation. If you'll give me the lie of the land. There isn't much to tell, Heath chewed on his cigar cognitiously. Cognitively. A Dr. Von Blon, the Greene family physician, phoned headquarters about midnight. I just got in from an uptown stick-up call, and I hopped out of the house with a couple of the boys from bureau. I found 2 women, like the one you know, one dead and the other unconscious, both shot. I phoned Doc Dorenmus, and then looked at the place over. Mr. Feathergill came along and lent a hand, but we didn't find much of anything. The fellow who did the job must have got in for the front door some way, for there was a set of footprints in the snow coming and going, besides Dr. Von Blon's. But the snow was too flaky to get any good impressions. It stopped snowing along about 11 o'clock last night, and there was no doubt that the prints belonged to the burglar, for no one except the doctor had come or gone after the storm. An amateur housebreaker with a front door key to the Greene mansion, murmured Vance. Extraordinary. I'm not saying he had a key, sir, protested Heath. I'm simply telling you what we found. The door might have been unlatched by mistake, or someone might have opened it for him. Go on with the story, Sergeant, urged Markham, giving Vance a reproving look. Well, after Dr. Immis got there and made an examination of the older woman's body and inspected the younger one's wound, I questioned all family and servants, a butler, 2 maids, and a cook. Chester Greene and the butler were the only 2 ones who had heard the first shots, which was fired about 11:30. But the second shot roused old Miss Greene. Her room adjoins the younger. Question the family. Second shot roused old Miss Greene. Her room adjoins the younger daughters. The rest of the household had slept through all the excitement, but this Chester fellow had woke him all up by the time I got there. I talked to all of them, but nobody knew anything. After a couple of hours, I left a man inside and another outside and came away. Then I set the unusual machinery going. And this morning, Captain Dubois went over the place the best he could for fingerprints. Dr. Remus has got the body for an autopsy, and we'll get a report tonight. But there's nothing helpful from that quarter. She was fired on from in front at close range. Almost a contact shot. And the other woman, the young one, was all powder marked, and her nightgown was burnt. She was shot from behind. That's all, and that's about all the dope. Have you been able to get any sort of a statement from the younger one? Not yet. She was unconscious last night, and this morning she was too weak to talk. But the doctor, von Blond, said we could probably question her this afternoon. We may get something out of her, in the case she got a look at the bird before he shot her. That suggests something to me, Sergeant. Vance had been listening passively to the recital, but now he drew in his legs, lifted himself a little. Did any member of the Greene household possess a gun? Keith gave him a sharp look. This Chester Greene said he had an old .32 revolver he used to keep in his desk drawer in the bedroom. Oh, did he now? And did you see the gun? I asked him for it, but he couldn't find it. Said he hadn't seen it for years, but probably it was around somewhere. Promised to dig it up for me today. Don't hang on any fond hopes of finding it, Sergeant. Vance looked at Markham musingly. I begin to comprehend the basis of Chester's psychic perturbation. I fear he's a crass materialist after all. Sad. You think he missed the gun and took fright? Well, something like that, perhaps. One can't tell. It's a deuced confusing. He turned an insolent eye on the sergeant. By the way, what sort of gun did your burglar use? Keith gave a gruff, uneasy laugh. You score there, Mr. Vance. I've got both bullets, 32s, fired from a revolver. Not the automatic. But you're not trying to intimate. Tut tut, Sergeant. Like Goth, I'm merely seeking for more illumination. But one may translate licked, Markham interrupted the gracious evasion. I'm going to the greenhouse after lunch, Sergeants. Can you come along? Sure I can, sir. I was going out anyway. Good. Markham brought forth a box of cigars. Meet me here at 2, and take a couple of these perfectos before you go. He selected the cigars and put them carefully into his breast pocket. At the door he turned with a bantering grin. You come along, Mr. Vance, to guide our erring footsteps, as they say. Nothing could keep me away, declared Vance. Okay, well, I think that's gonna do it for tonight. I've been streaming for almost an hour now, and I'm getting a little tired, and I think my eyes are getting tired, and my voice is getting tired, and I'm starting to rip up. So I'm gonna give it a rest for now, and back at some point. So that has been Books on Stream, the Greenberg case. And next time, be sure to catch Chapter 3. Okay.